Welcome back, Rio Grande Guardian viewers. As always, on our podcast, we have a very special guest. Today's special guest, I'm so pleased to catch up with him again, is Juan Escobar. I'm going to tell you why we're meeting up with Juan again in just a moment. But first, Juan, great to see you again.
Hey, Steve, nice to see you as always. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. So, the reason we want to talk to Juan today, he's just been elected to the Rio Grande Valley Hall Sports of Fame, the Hall of, what would it be titled?
It's called Induction into the Rio Grande Valley Sports Hall of Fame.
You can see I'm not a sports guy, but this is a great honor, I do know that. So one is in the Hall of Fame in the Valley of Sports. But we're starting on the subject of genealogy because I have this fantastic story I tell people, which for me explains and shows that Juan is an incredible genealogist for our region. So we're going to go back probably 15 years or so, Juan. You're a state rep out of Kingsville.
Yes, sir.
The Rio Grande Valley Partnership is putting this Valley tour together. And they're touring in that time. That would have been a year when they did Hidalgo and Starr counties, not Cameron and Willacy. You're on the bus that evening. You know what's coming.
Yes.
You know what's coming. And so you weren't on the bus, or if you were, you were at the back on the way over. So all these visiting legislators and their staff were going to Quinta Mazatlan for dinner.
Right.
And the president of the Valley Partnership in those days was Bill Summers.
Correct.
The late, great Bill Summers. And as you know, he'd always ask the person that's right at the front, the local guy or girl right at the front of the bus, to take the microphone and tell the story to all the visitors of whichever town we were passing through. I'm towards the back of the bus, and going to the Quinta Mazatlan, sitting at the front is a guy called Steve Arrhenius, who at the time was president of the McAllen Chamber. So Bill hands him the microphone and says, "Steve, tell the visitors about McAllen." And his remarks are something like, in 1909, McAllen was formed by John McAllen, whatever it was. But his total reference point was the McAllen he knew, 1909. Okay, we get off the bus, we have a nice dinner at Quinta Mazatlan. On the bus going back, you're on board, you're sitting at the front, and Bill Summers hands you the microphone and asks you to tell the story of this region. You don't start in 1909. Remind us, I don't remember the year you started, but if Steve did his narrow version of his knowledge of the history of this region, you had a whole other story. And I remarked to Tony Gray, who was sitting next to me, used to work with the late, great Rene Oliver, the state rep. I chuckled because you had a very different version. You were talking about the history of the valley from the year.
Well, it went back to 1749, and that's when the Spaniards came here. They settled the area. Initially, they settled what today is known as Camargo, across Rio Grande City. And then after that, they ended up settling Reynosa, which is right across, Hidalgo. And so I mentioned that how some of the founders, the original founders of these communities were very different from what we knew in history. And eventually, we had the Bailly family that came over to Reynosa, and he was a Bailly girl who married John McAllen, and that's how McAllen had started. It was not McAllen that started it, but it was the Bailly family from the 1700s. So they married into the McAllens, and then of course the rest is in the history we have today. But we were here as Spaniards, including my five great grandfathers, who settled the community of Escobares. And then my great-great-grandfather was born a Spaniard. Then he became a Mexican citizen in 1821. And there was a period of time there where he was. You have to go and study it a little bit. He was a citizen of an issue that took place. It was called the territory of the Rio Grande, and they were fighting to maintain their land. And then in 1850, he became a U.S. citizen. And then in 1861, he became a Confederate citizen. Then in 1865, he became a U.S. citizen again. That was my great-great-grandfather. And so these families, the Baillis, well, they were the same. They married into the McAllen, but generations after generations had been here. First, they were Spaniards, and then they became Mexicans, and then they became members of that. It was called the territory of the Rio Grande, and then they were U.S. citizens, and then there were Confederate citizens during the Civil War, and they went back to U.S. citizens. Now, one of the issues that's always been in question that we were here, that we were part of Texas. Well, we were never part of Texas. And that's why we ended up in the Mexican-American War of 1848 and 1850, because this territory still part of Mexico. When Santa Anna lost at San Jacinto, he gave Houston a small portion of what today is Texas. So that was the question. And Polk, when Texas wanted to be annexed by the U.S., Polk said, "Where are the boundaries?" They said, "Well, the boundaries are," Santa Anna said, "the Nueces River." Houston said, "No, the Rio Grande." So it was disputed territory. So to avoid the dispute, that disputed territory, the U.S. offered Mexico, for what today is known as the Nueces Strip, he offered Mexico $10 million. And the person that was leading the charge to give him the $10 million was Abraham Lincoln. Unfortunately, the Mexicans said, "No, we don't want the money." So eventually Polk had an excuse, sent troops into the territory of the Nueces, and in a place called Relámpago, which is very close to La Feria on the border, there was a battle. And right now it's a small little park with a cannon there and a little monument. But that right there, that's where the war started in April of 1846. When the war was over, and of course the U.S. sent a bunch of troops. We had troops in Fort Brown, Fort Ringgold in Rio Grande City, and they had blockades all over. General Taylor had blockades all over the area, and so the Mexicans were just basically not able to come north. They were kept south, and then they went into all these battles, and eventually Mexico lost that war. And not only did they lose the part of Texas that they were fighting for, they ended up losing the states of New Mexico, Arizona, California, I believe a part of Colorado, Nebraska, Nevada, Utah. And so one-fifth of what today is the U.S. was lost there, and then the U.S. gave Mexico $15 million. And so it was during this period of time that these people were alluded to the fact that McAllen didn't come until later. It was totally later that he came when what was his name? They were from Edinburgh, Scotland, and they were brought in, and his friend, I want to say, I can't remember his name, but there's a street in Edinburgh named after him. He was the one that said, "Okay, John, come on over, there's opportunities." And he came over, and they started doing a lot of economic development on the border there between Hidalgo, what is today Hidalgo and Texas, and Reynosa. And that's when McAllen then met Bailly, and they married, and of course the rest is the history that we're talking about. So there's two histories here. It depends how you look at it.
So I think we've already established from that one question, that one answer from you, that you're a bit of a history buff. You clearly know your history, and you studied genealogy. But I just thought it was fascinating that there was one perspective, and then there was the real deal. You gave that and like you have today, an incredible story about how it all started. Where did this love of genealogy and history come for you? How was it at an early age that it just fascinated you?
Yes. In my growing years in Escobares, there was no TV. We didn't have a television at home till I was 16, almost 17 years old. And there was one radio. And my brother was always playing KIRO, and I wanted to hear the Spanish stations in Mexico. So my grandfather had a radio, and he would listen to the Mexican stations. So at night, sometimes they were talking, and they were talking about, because I have a degree in biology with a minor in math, and I spent the majority of my professional career in federal law enforcement. So anyway, I really enjoyed the stories that my grandfather and his siblings and friends would talk about when the Comanches raided the area, when they came in and how they came, and it had to be a full moon, and then how his uncle was kidnapped by the Comanches and taken to a place north. They didn't know where, but eventually I found out that they took him to a place close to Columbus, Texas, and on the Colorado River, and how he escaped. I found that information as well. So by loving this story about history that they were talking, I started getting involved in my genealogy. And then it's taken me 60, 70 years to finally just go 2 more generations back from the original Spaniards that came here. My family came from Spain called the Escobar family. They came from Albacete in Spain, and that's very close to Madrid. It's about a 2-hour drive from Madrid. And some of my relatives have gone up to Albacete, and there's a lot of Escobares there. And then on my mother's side, my family comes from Portugal, the Vera, they're Portuguese. So what I did is I started enjoying knowing about the history and who was related to who and what, and so on and so forth. I told one of my cousins the other day, whom I don't know, this individual, but he called me from Houston, and we started talking. Well, I knew his father, but at the time that his father was growing up, there was no really economic growth for everybody to live on, to sustain in the ranch. So he went up to Houston, married, and stayed over there. So I was telling him, this individual married this individual. Both of them were Escobar. Wow. Well, are you surprised? Let me tell you, their fathers and mothers were also Escobar. So this guy here was Escobar, and this other one was Escobar Salinas. And how did you know all of this? Well, a lot of that I have done the research. I have actually gone to the records of, the archives of the marriage, death records of Mier, Camargo, Reynosa, Guerrero, which was called Revilla at one time. It was not Guerrero. And then, how did they meet? How did they marry? Very old-fashioned. Today, it would be old-fashioned traditions. If they had one aunt and one uncle, they were caught necking out in a barn one day, and just because of that, they married them, because they didn't know if anything else farther had taken place. And so they had to get married. And they were married until they both passed away.
Have you written any of this down? I mean, I should know this, but have you documented this? Is it something that you will be able to leave for the library or the museums, all the information that you've picked up? And
yes, I have written a lot of information on not only Escobar and Vera, but I've also done the De Los Santos, which is my maternal grandmother, De Los Santos Herrera. The De Los Santos family, I traced it to about 1220, and the last name was actually Coy, and how they changed from Coy to De Los Santos. And then I did the Herrera line, and they go back to today to Los Herreras, Mexico, and then Monterrey. And several of my ancestors were involved in the founding of Monterrey. And so as a consequence, I found out very interested in things. I found out, for example, that my father-in-law and I were fourth-generation relatives on the De Los Santos line. But to answer your question, I have written some information in one small little family reunion of the Escobar. I printed out a booklet. I made 100 copies of this booklet, and it cost me $13.53 to put out, and I sold it for $15. So I didn't make any money, but somebody else took the book and went and printed it and passed it free, hardbound, and you find it in the internet for $150. And the only reason I didn't go to court with that is because I wanted people to find out about their family. And I still do that. I give out information to people because it's important for people to know where they come from. I always say that people in this life they weren't just born and just lived there for 70 years and died. They did something. Some good, some bad, some whatever. Some people, we've had for example, General Ricardo Sanchez. He's from Rio Grande City. He's my age. We went to school at the same time. We knew each other. Well, he married one of my cousins. So his children are, even though they are Sanchez, they're Sanchez Garza, and their mother was Escobar, from Escobar. And I had one uncle who was a POW in World War II of the Germans. I've had four uncles that were killed in World War II in Korea. So we have contributed since we became U.S. citizens, and we didn't come to the U.S. The U.S. came to us. And I've heard people use that statement before, but I had been using that for many, many years. That my people had come, we were already here, and the U.S. came to us. So that's where the love of my genealogy came. I still enjoy it. I can spend hours and hours. Yeah. One particular girl who happens to be, her last name is Garza, but her father was Garza Vera. So he was related to me through my mother's side of the family. And I found out that her mother ended up going back, 300 years ago, was from the royalty in Germany. And somebody questioned that, and I said, go look at this place, this, and that, and you'll find it. And she was amazed that I had found that information.
Do you feel you've still got to put more down in writing that, for all the knowledge that's in your head that you picked up, then you probably got notes everywhere, but do you think you could collate it all and say, this is all, everything I've got?
Oh yeah, I can do that right now. I have a file, and I've got all the genealogy, different kinds, and it might have to have a little bit of cleaning up, organization, but it's all in different files, and it's got different.
Do the museums know what you know?
No. The museum there in Kingsville has done a little bit of my history of what I've done. When I was in the Marine Corps, that I buried President Johnson and President Truman. They've recorded a couple of the songs that I have composed and stuff like that. But yes, that museum has a little bit. The museum and the archives in Austin had a little bit, but that's of my political part. And some people may not agree with my politics. I'm not a liberal. I'm very conservative. You know that. Even though that nowadays, if you're a Democrat, people look at you as a very liberal individual, but no, I do.
One last thing before we go on to the sports side, but so I take it then when you were growing up, you were totally bilingual from the beginning?
From the beginning. And in fact, I was just talking to the girl up front, and I was telling her, by us speaking and understanding two languages, we can carry a conversation and 2 or 3 sentences and back and forth and speak 2 languages, maybe even 3, because we can. And some people that speak correct Spanish, don't speak anything else other than correct Spanish. But you have to deal with the people, and you have to deal with society. And sometimes, if you don't understand what you call the the Spanglish or the Tex-Mex or the what. I'll quickly relate one story, and it had to do with what's known as Pachuquismo, which is slang. Well, I didn't know that, and we spoke any words that were out of line, and would lead to a word in Pachuco, or in that particular language. You would get corrected on the spot, and they would get after you. Well, when I was in Marine Corps boot camp, there was about 8 guys from Westside San Antonio, and that's all they spoke to me. So I had to learn it in order to do my job as a squad leader. And one day I'm at the Border Patrol checkpoint in Falfurrias, and I've got this guy from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, standing next to me. And I told him, Rick, listen to what I'm doing. See how I check traffic, because it's different from the way the other guy does it. And then you can pick up your own style. So I'm checking traffic, and one of the local ranchers comes to, and hey, Pat, hey, Juan, what's going on? Not much. And he just slow rolls. He never stopped. He slow rolls and goes to. Right behind him, there was this van. And the guy had a little long hair. He had a bandana and a little steering wheel. And as soon as I saw the individual, I said, I'm going to run into a little confrontation here. So I asked the Border Patrol, where were you born? And he said, I'm going to speak, when he told me, I'm going to tell you in English, even though he's there in Spanish. He goes, hey, man, why did you let that guy go? Because he's a gringo or what? And I said, no, because I know where he lives. He lives close to my house. And you, where are you from? And I was speaking like that, and all of a sudden he tells me, hey, man, where did you learn how to speak like this? So I said, in the Nam, en el Nam. He said, you were in Nam? I said, yeah. Who were you with? And I said, I was with the 7th Marines. Hey, Vato, I was with the 5th Marines. And he shook my hand, and so then we conversed for about 10 minutes in this lingo. And then finally I said, dale gas, and took off. This guy says, Juan, I went to the academy to learn how to speak Spanish. There was no Spanish. And so I told him a little bit of what happened. The only word I understood was something about gas. And I said, dale gas, means step on the pedal and get out of here. So a few minutes later, he got to traffic, and somebody would come in and he would say, dale gas. But anyway, so I from a young age, I knew how to write. I know how to write, read, and speak Spanish correctly. And I'm fluent in both languages. And because of that, I'm able to understand a little bit of Italian and French. And it's really not that hard.
So I had a feeling that this conversation would be quite a long one. There's a lot to cover. So we'll probably have to do this in 2 or 3 hits.
Right, go ahead.
You know, we'll do the military, your distinguished military career next time, and also your career as an elected official. But as we're advertising this, that you are in the Sports Hall of Fame, a bit about talking about sports for just a couple of minutes. I was always under the impression that you were an incredible runner, right? And yet I was reading that you're in the Sports Hall of Fame because of your prowess on the basketball.
That is correct. Well, I was both a runner and a basketball player. At Roma, I went to Roma High School here in the Valley. And at Roma, at that time, they only had 2 sports, which was basketball and track. And so I went to regional, and I went to state in track. I went to state in the quarter mile. I was 440 then. That's a long story on that one, and then nevertheless, I loved basketball because they had it, but they didn't have a gymnasium, so we had to play in a concrete basketball slab. And I remember I was in Washington D.C. and I played ball for the Marine Corps as well. And a captain who had been an All-American at Georgetown, who was 6'6", he told me, and later that captain became Commandant of the Marine Corps, highest ranking Marine. And he asked me, he said, Sergeant Escobar, where did you learn how to play basketball? So I said, well, it started at home. And so what happened was my grandfather knew that I liked it. So what he did one day, I come in from school, and he had pressed with a piece of old-fashioned type, he had pressed a piece of dirt behind the house, and then he had put a mesquite tree. I was kind of crooked, And that had a meaning as well, the mesquite. And then he put a board, a plywood board, and then he placed a piece of ream from it was called of lard that was sold in buckets, and it was about that big. And then he wrapped it around with a burlap sack, and that was our basketball. And that's where we learned how to play basketball out there. And and then we went on, and my 8th grade year, the high school coach approached me and he said, Juan, would you like to play varsity basketball next year? And I said, yeah. So the following year, I became a starter as a freshman, and we lost 24 games, and we won only one game. But it was a very crucial, important, historical game that we won. All the guys thought they were going to beat us, and they got drunk, and we beat them. And I made all district that year. Eventually, I made all district my 4 years, and then my senior year, I made all state first team. I was the first Hispanic all state first team individual in the whole Rio Grande Valley. And then I was also selected to the decade of the century of the 60s in the first team. And I made, at that time, they didn't mention it at the Rio Grande Valley Sports Hall of Fame, but I got selected to the all-border team as well. There were people from Carrizo Springs, from other places throughout the South Texas region that were selected.
So it surprises me when you tell me in Roma, where you went to school, there was athletics and there was basketball, but no baseball.
No baseball. When I was an 8th grader, Roma had baseball, and I was being pegged to be a pitcher because I had a strong arm. I was strong. I was very, very strong in it, and I was going to be. And I started working on that. But then the following year, they did away with baseball. In fact, because of that reason, the baseball coach left Roma and went to Rio Grande City, and it had to do with the school board didn't want to spend money and get the. Because it had to do with controlling the masses the way I see it today, because then all the students were dropping out instead of staying in school. Their parents were not going to make that sacrifice for them to stay in school. Whereas if I was really loving the sport and I wanted to drop out, my mother would tell me no. And so that was something that did not take place then.
Because in Rio Grande City, basketball was very big because of the fort. I know a lot of people learned to play basketball.
And in fact, talking about that, both Rio Grande City and Zapata came to my house, not the coaches. They sent other people and came and spoke to my mother. And they wanted us to go and play football because of our speed and our big hands and our sizes. So they wanted me and my brothers to go on and play football up there. But one day we just sat down in a table as a family, and we told my mother, no. I mean, if we're going to do it, let's do it here in Roma. They've never had anything. And we did. And in fact, the track in Roma in February of last year, it was named the Escobar Brothers track.
Was it a nice surprise for you to be inducted into the Hall of Fame? Because for me, I was thinking, well, this should have happened a long time ago.
Exactly.
I've known you were an incredible sportsman with honors in junior military service. You were in the star teams. So what took them so long to recognize you?
Well, I'm sure there's a certain amount of politics there, but I think at the end of the day, it may have been just forgotten in time. There's other people that have been forgotten in time. I'll give you an example. When I got inducted into the Laredo, it was the International Sports Hall of Fame. I got inducted along with a couple of professional people. One of them was Anthony Munoz, who played for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was there. But there was an individual that had played professional baseball in the 30s and 40s, and he was just getting inducted. Nago Alaniz from Mission, and he had played professional baseball. And I think that's what had happened. As I got forgotten in time, and there was some politics there involved, which I think I'll just skip to myself, but most people that hear this or read these, they'll know who I'm talking about.
So is the big event, or is it simply the case that you've been announced you're going to be inducted, or has the event itself happened?
It already happened. It happened last weekend. I got inducted along with Robert Garza, who played football with the Chicago Bears. And there was another individual, I can't remember his name. It's a very unusual last name. She played professional baseball with the San Diego Padres, and he's a coach somewhere in a school somewhere in another state. And then, of course, there was some track teams, some amazing people that have competed in sports throughout. The Valley has so much talent, not only in sports, but in so many other areas. It just given me an opportunity, guide them, put good role models in front of them, and they will be successful. They will deliver.
So was it a nice event? A lot of fun?
I'm sorry?
The event when you were inducted the other night, that was fun?
It was fun because I didn't expect to see some of the people I saw there. I met some people that were related to me that I didn't even know would be there, that I've never seen, but I know they're related. Genealogy right away kicked in. It turns out that this lady and her son were there. Well, the lady's mother-in-law, no, the lady's grandmother, the lady's grandmother's, let me rephrase this. The lady's mother-in-law, that lady's mother, and my grandmother were sisters. That's named Chapa on my mother's side of the family too. My mother was Chapa. She was Vera through my grandfather, and Chapa to my grandmother. So, and that surprised me. And, it's just that there's so many people, like what you're doing here today, Steve, for me. You're reaching out and helping me go through my path of life. You're not rejecting me. You're not putting me off to one side. So there's so many people in this life that I got to be thankful for, because they reached out to me. They sustained me. They been in combat in Vietnam among guys that know they're going to get killed, and they still back you up. And that's what we're all about. And it's not about me only, because at the end of the day, you lose. You think that winning is the only important thing in life, but you got to know how you're going to handle your losses. That's what my grandfather taught me. He taught me, Juan, remember that life is not only about winning, but rather how are you going to handle your losses? Because in life, many times you're going to lose, and that's an experience that'll help you. And we've had losses in life. You have had too, but look at where you are. But many people give up and forget about it, and you can't give up. You got to keep moving forward. So when you have people that are along the road that reach out and extend their hands to help you out.
Juan, we're going to leave it there for now, only because of the time factor. I know you've got some pressing things. You're reaching out with your family down here. I'd like to do this again. There's a part 2 and probably a part 3. We're going to talk about your incredible history and service to the country, to our country, and to and your incredible career as an elected official, both as a county judge and a state rep, another. So we'll do all that another time.
I just want to conclude with this, if you don't mind. For those people that read this or hear this, I just want to say that we're always going to be different sides of the fence on many issues. But what's made us great is that we come together like right now with this issue that's taking place up in the Guadalupe River. People have come together. And that's what we should always remember. Let's come together and see what areas we can build on, those areas. And then the other ones will eventually fall into place at some point or another, instead of being divided like we are right now. And I thank those people that I had the opportunity to see this. They can reach out to me at any time they want to. I live in Kingsville. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of my roots. Long live the United States, no better country than the U.S. the way I see it.